All right, now hello everyone, and welcome to this month's Instructor Community Call. So this is the one for June. My name, as always, is Kyle Rosenthal. I'm a Microsoft Certified Trainer and Account Executive here at Skillable. My contact details there if you do want to reach out. There is another person who's joining, but I'm going to wait to introduce him a little bit later on. So there's just a mystery man floating as another face. So the agenda for today, we're deep in the welcome at the moment, and then I've got a couple of sort of housekeeping sort of items just around some of our Microsoft content and some of the changes that are coming up around that, so that everyone can be aware. Then we will have a fireside chat with Rasmus, who's joining us from Veeam, and he'll be able to discuss some of the challenges and that sort of thing that are around courseware and courseware development and that sort of thing. So that'll be. I'm actually really looking forward to having that conversation with Rasmus. He's always a very interesting and entertaining person to speak with. Not to put any pressure on him, and but just as I said, a little bit of housekeeping to start off with. So with our Microsoft courses, so there has been some newly published courses that are out there. So the recently published courses, a lot of these are replacements or uplifts for current courses as well. And there's a couple that are still in development. In particular, there's one of them, the MD102, actually we did have as released, and then we've pulled it back out again. Just simply there was some questions that came out of the QA process that we've taken back to the content owner to get some clarity on and that sort of thing. The other thing, just as a reminder for all of those courses which are the no Azure Pass courses, so you'll see there's a few of those that dropped in the newly published courses. That any of the ones that are Azure Pass required, that you no longer get supplied that through your courseware through the courseware marketplace or through your administrator in the training center. Instead, we actually supply that. It'll be part of the resources tab is where you'll see that start showing up. So on there, that's where you'll actually see a separate option, which is for the Azure Pass, if there is an Azure Pass required. But as we've discussed in previous calls, like sort of the goal is to move away as much as possible from Microsoft, to move away as much as possible from having you have to redeem those Azure Passes, and instead on the resources tab you'd be using like the content that's already provided within there. So you'll see that those changes will keep on rolling out to more and more courses as well. The other thing that I don't have on the slide here, but just to make notice of, is, as you are probably all aware, or hopefully are aware, that the courseware marketplace, Microsoft are going away from using the courseware marketplace for having that as an option to be able to purchase labs and lab content. So our courseware, the Skillable courseware marketplace, will be released for preview from the 15th of June. So at recording date, that's going to be tomorrow. That'll be released. You won't be able to order anything or anything like that at the moment, but you would be able to set yourself up with an account and basically have a little bit of a peek around and that sort of thing. And certainly, if you are a Microsoft, like any of the Microsoft Learning Center, training centers, will have been sent details about how to set up accounts, that sort of thing, and will be certainly invited once it's open to be able to start doing that purchase. But that's obviously a big shift that's going to be that's happening. That's going to be put into place at the end of June. So we're trying to make sure that we've got all the blocks in place to be able to make sure that's ready to go. Okay, so now is the time that I'm going to invite Rasmus in to have just a bit of a chat, as I said, about courseware and courseware development and that sort of thing. And so Rasmus, would you like to introduce yourself and just give us a little bit of your background and I have put your Twitter handle in there just in case anyone wants to reach out to you as well. So if there's something else you want me to add in, LinkedIn account or anything like that, let me know as well, and I'll add that in. So.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for that, Carl. Yeah, I'm Rasmus Hastel. I work at Veeam since 2016. I've worked with Veeam originally as a customer, and then later on as a consultant, then as a system engineer at a distributor, then trainer, and then eventually joined on after as I was one of those pesky trainers who kept complaining about the quality of the materials, and eventually they were like, "Well, we think it would make sense to pay you to complain to yourself, so then you can just kind of sit and fix things directly, and we don't have to talk to you about that anymore." So that's kind of the journey. But I started teaching myself as an instructor back in 2013, and that was as a VMware instructor, and then as a Veeam instructor in 14. But I was also a MCT back then, but haven't really actually done too much Microsoft training since then, to be honest. Just kind of the way the cards fell on the table afterwards.
Well, we won't hold it against you. It's fine.
Yeah, but it's been quite a journey, sort of circling around. Sometimes I joke, well, maybe I need to make a little stint to some alliance partner and then come back again or something, just to kind of say I've done the whole tour.
So when you work in your role that you've got with Veeam now, so obviously you look after the VMCT program as well. So you look after like the Veeam certified trainers, and then you also what's your role in like the courseware and the courseware development, that sort of thing? Like what sort of thing? Like obviously, you know, you said you're now complaining to yourself. So,
yeah, it's been an interesting journey. So yeah, I should have immediately, of course, been a good trainer here and explained the acronym here, the VMCT acronym. So you're right. That's the Veeam certified trainer program. And the day job is typically, as you said, managing indirectly, you could say, because very few of these instructors work directly for Veeam, as it usually happens, right? They're either employees at the education centers or freelancers who operate their own business, and they sort of work with a variety of training centers. So it's mainly about making sure that when we do onboarding, we have a set defined process that's treating new instructors objectively fair, so they know exactly what to expect, what do they need to do, and how can they get approved to teach the different courses. But also, of course, that's not something that can happen every day. So it's also about following up on quality, looking at surveys. Hopefully it doesn't happen too often, but having a global program, every now and then there will be someone who's unhappy about something. So then we have to kind of sit and investigate a little bit. Well, was it just, and I think everyone here has had the experience at some point where everyone in the class was happy except one person. So then you just kind of got to figure out, well, was it just one person who's unhappy with, well, recently I had such an example, and when I called the person, it turns out the main complaint was that there was no ice cream served in the lunch buffet. It had nothing to do with Veeam or anything, but everything was kind of very severely lowly rated. So it's one of those things. Not everything always makes completely sense here, but the guy was like, well, I paid thousands of dollars, and the last time I was there was ice cream. I'm like, well, so you know, it's not really something I can influence, but I'll tell them it's probably a good idea to bring back the ice cream for survey results. But the other portion of the job, of course, is the content development, and yeah, which includes we run workshops, and I have some really good instructional designers who manage that process, which essentially is connecting with the business stakeholders to decide, sort of working a little bit backwards. So they'll figure out, well, if someone is a, let's say, Veeam certified engineer, so they've passed the exam, well, what should this person be able to do?
Right.
And then we'll work backwards to say, okay, well, to be able to do those things, what kind of learning objectives will we then have that we can connect to that? And what kind of modalities would we need here? Is this where we, and how far do we want to define that? Like, is it slideware? Is it hands-on labs? Is it going to be a quiz? Is it a demo? Is it show them a video that they need to go through, or the instructor will play? Or are these like post-class labs, or do they need to happen during the class? And once we have kind of those things set out, well, then we can start to look at what do we then need inside, for example, this lab environment for them to be able to go and do those things, right? So before I can just start randomly building things on the Skillable platform, for example, we need to have some kind of vision. Well, we need Active Directory, but let's say you want to train people on using Veeam's tool for restoring emails. Well, then we need an email server there. It needs to contain emails, so there is something to go back and restore as a part of that process. Or as an example, recently we had things where we needed to train on utilizing some level of automation. Okay, well then that involved making like backup policies as opposed to selecting individual virtual machines or servers. So we had to use vSphere tags, but then again, then that means I have to have a vCenter from VMware, for example, there, because otherwise we can't use the tags. So it's very much about figuring out what do we need. And once we have all of that, okay, then we can build the initial lab, but then we have to write exercises, right? And that typically starts off with very high level. This is the features that we want to use, but then we also have to think about the sequencing of all of that. So that a lot of thought goes into that. And sometimes, even though I think I have it all figured out once we start doing the labs, I realize, yeah, okay, this doesn't work because this is depending on something that wasn't created yet, or because I did this, there's some limitation and that prevents me from doing this thing later on. So I need to do that before I do this thing. And okay, not a big problem, but then I have to go back and take the lab exercises I was writing out and revise them. And then, you might think, then that's it. No, then I have to go all the way back to the beginning and do all of them again to see, is there maybe some new sequencing problem that we now have produced. So it's not often, but it can become a bit of a whack-a-mole type situation. And of course, when you're writing all of these instructions, right, you have to try and think about many things. Like one of the things I really liked we were able to include is the ability to have markdown so that we can display the instructions right on the screen, but also include the little checkboxes, both for the instructor, of course, so they have an idea how far people in the process, but also for the students. Sometimes if it's the first time they're using the software, maybe they forget which exact window they were supposed to be in and stuff like that. And so sort of the ability to tick off where are they in the process helps a lot in my experience. But also, how do you write? Like, should you write click this button? That's often the language I naturally would deviate towards, but we've spent a lot of time doing sort of to a certain degree inclusion, but also accessibility. And that sort of told me, well, I shouldn't write click, I should write select, for example. Because what if you have some disability that means you're not actually clicking on anything? Maybe you're using some other device to click, right? But you're not actually clicking. So it's tricky because I can say as a non-native speaker, I find sort of the select word a little bit confusing myself, right? So it's all about figuring out, okay, well, if we then want to keep the word click, okay, well, then we have to very clearly identify the text of the button that they'll be pressing on. So not just say like, okay, then click to the next step, but actually what is the alternative text label of the button. So a lot of time can very quickly be invested in just producing the lab environments and the exercises, and we didn't even write the actual student lab guide yet. That's kind of the next step after all of this.
I always find that process of when you're building up a lab, and you've got you know what the end goal is, you know what the end state is, and you know where you're starting from. It's kind of like the movie like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, where where they get they're in jail and they go, well, if we had gone, if afterwards, if we come back here and we put a key underneath that bucket, then we'll be able to get out of jail. So you kind of go, all right, well, so I'm gonna note down that I've got to go back and put the key in place so that it's there for when I start. So at least you can achieve something in that point to see if you can get to the end point. But you're right, then you have to go all the way back and start again to see that it's that you've actually been able to that you haven't caused any more ripples in the time as you've gone through. So with the process of the lab content, so do you do the courseware as well as the instructional designers that do the rest of the course part of it, the verbiage that leads up to the labs, or do you do that as well?
So the instructional designers will typically work with SMEs, and I'll usually be a part of that process where we end up getting the actual learning objectives written that kind of tie up to the objectives on the exam. And the wordsmithing can take a lot of time. Like, is it configure, or is it use, or what are these verbs that we are using? But it's an important process, because I was involved in a training a couple of years back, and it involved one of our monitoring products, Veeam1, and it's a relatively sizable product. And the only objective I was presented with was configure Veeam1 options.
Right.
And I was like, okay, but this is a monitoring reporting product, and you want me to teach people how to configure options inside. Okay, well, great. So, a lesson person might just say, okay, well, here's the menu. Let's just go to every single configurable option, but it had nothing to do with using it for monitoring. It had nothing to do with using it for doing any of the reporting. It was more like, oh, this is the database limitations you can adjust, and this is the frequency of collections and stuff. And so it's just really important, actually, that the objectives are clear, because if they're not, it doesn't correctly tie in with the exam, but also it makes it confusing for the trainers who are going to be teaching this, right? I'm a big fan of when we have slideware and you start a new module, to list right on the slides of the new section to say, this is what we're going to cover. This learning objective, this one, and then even at the end to kind of have a bit of a summary slide. Because if I'm teaching myself, I kind of use that as my little binding contract at the end to say, so this is what we covered.
Yeah.
If anyone feels that wasn't covered, please do speak up. But I'll kind of just quickly run through the list, and I'll know if we did it or not. And sometimes someone will say, we definitely didn't cover that, because online trainings these days, people can be gone for an entire hour, and then suddenly they pop up again in the middle of it, and then other people will. But this is where sort of the group justice system appears, right? So someone else will be like, no, we definitely covered that. I clearly remembered, so and so had a question, and so on. But it's okay. Then we'll do maybe a quick recap or something. But again, it helps the process, and I try to use them actively when we're developing the labs as well, not just to figure out what are we going to do, but also it's easy to say, well, now we're just going to do a bunch of labs. But actually in the instructions start off with, these are the the objectives that you're going to be touching on, so that people have an understanding of, well, this is actually the reason why. Because on the exam, I'm supposed to be able to use this. That's why I'm learning about it now. So it makes sense. And if you want to pass the exam, you better pay extra attention here at least. So that's kind of a little bit guiding wire to some degree.
Yeah, and also like I guess you also have to make sure that they relate to each other as well. Like, so for instance, like if you've got the content that's in like the courseware or the slideware, and then you go to like a hands-on lab, it has to relate to what like it's like the whole purpose that I always see like with the hands-on content in that sort of circumstance is you're reinforcing what the original like what the content is basically. Like it's that principle of like the tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you've told them, sort of like as a journey. But then like the final part of that of the tell them what you told them is reinforce it with that lab. But you've also got to like balance that out with it being there's a balancing act between it being a very granular type lab, like something that like is okay. Click on select these three things, and then it's done. Or like and maybe that takes you like 5 minutes to do, and it's like, well, is that all I wanted to achieve at that point, or do you like it? And it could be because that's like that relates to whatever was just being discussed, or that's the hands-on component you can pull out of what was being discussed. But then maybe you kind of, rather than doing module 1, module 2, module 3, so I think maybe you go to module 3, and in module 3 you kind of pull together a few things to have as the activities that you go into there. But it is a balancing act, like from, I guess. And then I guess you've also got to take into consideration that that instructors, once you're in the classroom, instructors, as you probably did, like probably did as well as an instructor, you mold things a little bit of your own journey as well. Like you kind of like, well, this makes more sense for what how I consider this to be. Like you've got to have some respect for the person who's actually put the effort in to make the content, who's created the storyline, because it is like training is all about the story, right? It's the storyline. It's taking students on that journey. So it's taking them on that journey from where they were of having no knowledge and building it up on the way through. But it's also trying to say, but if you know something already, I'm not going to you're going to have to sit through some of the basics to start off with before we get to that, because not everyone has that, knows what you know. So so the other question that I had for you, because I know that you've been through a couple of iterations now of the product, right? So where you've gone through different versions of the product, and some of them have been the major bumps and that sort of thing. What's the approach that you have between the versions? Like, do you just wipe the board clean and start again, or is it more of an iterative type development? Like you go, well, this is what we did last time, let's do the same thing now, but we'll see how that works with this new product, with the new version, and then include the new parts as well, or is it something different?
I think it's almost like the consultant's answer here, right? It depends a little bit. I think for the flagship products, which is what we have with hands-on labs on Skillable, there's a lot of features that are just the baseline, right? So they'll remain the same. So the question then is, the trainings can't keep growing in duration forever, right? So the class was 3 days, maybe suddenly it'll be 4, maybe it'll be 5 days, but it's rare you'll have a class that spans more than 5 days anyway. So regardless of how big it gets, at some point you have to kind of figure out, well, what's important and what's not important, and maybe some things are sort of more advanced, so you put that in a separate class or something like that, perhaps. But it's not so straightforward. I think what we try to do is, once the learning objectives are kind of identified, I immediately try and see, okay, well, surely there's going to be some overlap. And so that often means slides we can recycle, at least diagrams. A lot of the lab activities I can probably again recycle. Like, there's only so many ways I can teach someone to go and create a backup job, for example.
Yeah.
Maybe there'll be a couple of extra settings suddenly available, or maybe a label of a button has changed, so now it's next instead of finish or whatever. But there's always going to be some recyclable things. For the lab environment itself, I think it's driven a little bit by the times, right? So the last two iterations were pretty much the same, small adjustments to make new features possible to be used.
Yeah.
Whereas the revision we're doing now, there's a lot of much more hot topics out there on security, for example, segmentation, and I see a more and more common feedback I've received is, well, we sat the class and we saw the way the lab was built, and we thought that that was best practice, so we're going to go home and build it the same way. And I'll say, when we build labs, as much as I like to use a lot of resources, we also have to respect education centers a little bit, who have to pay for those resources.
Yep. Yep.
So sometimes we have to, and I don't want to necessarily say cut corners, but sometimes if there's no real learning benefit of doing things the right way, we can cut a corner or two here and there instead of having another server. Maybe we can just run two things on the same box, and that's fine. But I see it's something that's coming up a little bit more frequently, and I think everyone on these calls have heard about ransomware and so on. So I think for this iteration, we're going to put a lot more effort into segmenting things a lot more. In the past, I would just disable all of the firewalls in the closed off lab, because why even bother? It would just be something that was causing problems every now and then. Where now we'll have exercises that intentionally don't work with the firewall enabled, and you'll have to go and enable certain features that will allow you to complete with less firewall ports opened, and those ports will be pre-opened. So if you don't follow the instructions, it's going to fail, and we'll ask them to do it in a way that it fails. And this is always tricky, because as an instructor, even though like I've sat there and written myself like important notes, this is intentionally going to fail or something.
Yeah.
Somebody's always going to like raise the hand and say, oh, there's some problem, it failed, there's some error on my screen. I'm like, did you read the very next line? Oh, okay, then no problem. No.
Or the worst case scenario of that is if the line that says this is intentionally, with this note, please note this will fail, is over the page. So I've had that before, and it was like, it was perfectly formatted. That's where it went to. So, but so I think you like that's an important thing though, is that more and more as part of the intentional part of doing the lab development, courseware development, is that we go more from being the this is how you do it to this is what it looks like in the real world, because it makes it easier to do that translation, to be able to because otherwise, like someone's going to go back to the office and go, well, it worked if I turned all the firewalls off. So maybe that's what we need to do, is turn all the firewall off, and that's fine, And then of course, when they have issues with ransomware, then they come up and they go, well, so Rasmus, you told me that I needed to. All I did was I just turned everything off and it was fine, and now I've got ransomware. So yeah, but it's also, it's one of those things like sort of there was always that. the joke, the sort of the chuckle with say for instance Microsoft exams as an example. When I first started doing Microsoft certification, there was always the joke of, well, is it, is the answer the correct answer, or is it the Microsoft answer? Like it was, like it was, is it the one that was the officially correct answer, which wasn't the one that was actually, you would do within the real world. And I think I know that within, say for instance, the Microsoft certification path, there's been a lot more work to go away from that. So it's like the answers or the questions and the answers are more steeped in actual realism, as opposed to kind of trying to force an answer through. It's like, oh, this is the marketing answer that I need you to get, so that you can use this product, right? So, but and going hand in hand with that is then the course and the course and the hands-on components that lead you to that. It's like, so when we're doing the training, that you have, again, like that realistic sort of anchor of where things are, because it makes it, like, I always find it makes it more much more useful when someone goes back to the office to have actually done realistic exercises and learned something that was more real, that then something they can translate further through. Like I remember, and this is going back many years ago, I used to do the training for the operations manager, so Microsoft Operations Manager. And there were some things that we did within there that you that in the courseware was very much, you sort of short-circuited, shortcut some items. And but like, as the trainer, you always had to explain, when you go back to the office, it will not do this. And if it does, then you've done it wrong. So you need to do, this is the steps you actually need to take, because otherwise you set that false expectation, right? So, and I can only imagine that, like, when you're actually doing the development side, like it's also it's trying to balance the time that you need to be able to set something up or to get something in place with what that payoff is going to be. And so, like, it might be that rather than having to, well, so as an example, like, if you're doing your modules for the hands-on component, it might be that you you have the okay, we're going to go do this configuration, we're going to go run a backup as an example, right? And that backup in reality may take, half an hour, etc., to be able to do. But what's the payoff for someone doing that as a hands-on is to see that at the end of it, they get a backup. So what, like, you trigger it off, and then you kind of do the TV dinner. Here's one I prepared earlier, so the but it's like, like the amount of times that you've probably done it before, as well. Like, we have things that you've got to do, like, particularly if we're doing linear sort of labs, like, where something did build on top of each other, that you would have, like, an hour, 2 hours where, like, the amount of times I've watched Windows install or deploy using, like, remote deployment services for the end result to be, here's a Windows XP machine, showing my age, but here's a Windows XP machine, and it's like, great. And what was the benefit for watching that deploy? Once you get past the point where there's going to be, where there would be a failure if it was going to fail, the end result of it then starting, there's no real payoff for it. Like, there's no benefit for watching the timeline go for that hour to be able to get to the point of it then, if you're starting that VM. So yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and thank you for not mentioning Windows Millennium here, ME. Classic.
I don't think I ever deployed Windows ME using any remote deployment services. So that's probably the reason that escaped.
No, but you're exactly right, and it's something to think about, right? Because a few years back, I developed a training to teach our Orchestrator product, which is like automated recovery testing, but also to have, like, well, DR plans digitally available where you can just press a button and it'll go and either test it or actually go and start the failover. And super cool product.
Yeah.
But the very first lab was do the installation.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, you would click around and there was some value, but then you had to sit and wait for 15 minutes before you could do the next thing. And I think that's also a learning journey that I've been on. Like for the upcoming course we're going to have, the product is going to be pre-installed. That's what we always do.
Yeah.
But this time we'll have in the class a video, the sped up version where you just show the steps and then show steps and then it kind of goes through.
Yeah.
And the same thing, like I know we'll have a lot of interest. We've introduced a secondary database engine, for example.
Yeah.
Again, it's something I think we'll just describe how to do on the slides. Let's say you're using the old engine, which was Microsoft SQL. Now we've also introduced Postgres. And I know a lot of people are looking to migrate because they were maybe on SQL Express and it had some performance limitations naturally. So there'll be benefits for them to migrate. And it's a process that's going to take a lot of time. So just showing them how to do it in a video and talk them through it.
Yeah.
They don't need to actually go and because it's going to be like 2 clicks in a lab and then 30 minutes of just watching a progress bar. Zero value whatsoever. So totally agree. And then I think the next level we are looking to do this time around is going to be challenge labs essentially. And it's super exciting. That I think the tricky part is figuring out once we ask them to do something, how do I check that they actually did it correctly? That's the trick, right? And it's something we'll have to continue working on and be smart about. But I think it's the next way because often students will be like, well, this was a monkey lab. That's a feedback sometimes. Like they felt the text was too easy to follow, right? So that the instructions were maybe too well written. And well, I try to write them so anyone who's never used it before can use it. We used to call it I used to have colleagues in Russia. We obviously don't anymore, but they always called it the babushka test. So we would find some random elderly person who didn't know anything about IT, put them in front of a computer and ask them to do the lab and then see how long would they spend, right? So if they spent on average 45 minutes and we put an IT professional in front of the computer, well, surely it's not going to take more than 45 minutes to do the lab, unless they're like browsing around at other things, exploring. But I think the challenge labs are going to be interesting because we'll go away. Some labs will still be like that, but intermixing them will give the feeling that, okay, well, you should know how to do this. Go and do it and click here when you've done it. And you didn't actually do it, or yes, you did. That's going to be the next level for us, I think.
Yeah, because like sort of moving away from like the sort of the follow the bouncing ball type labs where you get to the end result and then you have a student who goes, well, what did I just do? Like they're not retaining that at all. Whereas with things like if you're not giving them all the steps to go along the way, or you're using them to be able to do that or you using the opportunity to be able to give them the pushing themselves or testing themselves, it's always like it's a good way to force them to think about what they're doing more as a student, but also then check to see if they've actually listened and remembered and that sort of thing as well. So that's a good plan. So one last question for you is with the it was obviously like if you've got courseware that you've released out and you've then got you then have feedback potentially from the instructors, potentially from students as well, but I imagine it would probably come via the instructors mainly. How do you then act on that? If someone says, this doesn't make sense or whatever, is that something that you then incorporate in the current version, or would you hold that over for a V .1 or something like that?
I would say it depends on what the feedback is, right? one of the things that confused me a lot when the job was new was I would get complaints that there was a mistake in the lab guide, and they would say like, yeah, this doesn't work. And I'd be like, well, I don't think you're right, but okay. But from the very beginning, I would just take a quick look and be like, okay, well, sounds like it's right, and then make a change. And very quickly I realized that was a bad idea, because oftentimes people would have skipped steps, or they would have made some mistake, or they wouldn't be using the official lab. They would be using a almost identical lab to someone at the education center built, and that had some known problem. So suddenly I could see multiple students from that particular education center would every now and then be reporting, because they would then have an errata sheet and they didn't follow that or something. So it's a tricky thing. Generally, if very rarely we get some feedback that there isn't a bug somewhere, I'll go and launch the lab, and I'll just do the lab myself and see, can I replicate this problem? And sometimes, sure, then we'll just go and fix it pretty much immediately. If I can see it's really a problem, this is what I'm happy about with the markdown, I'll just go and fix it on the back end silently. The thing is, we also provide courseware digitally or physical, and I can't just republish those constantly. So those are a little bit more periodically updated. So someone who's following the printed version, they'll not necessarily get the changes immediately. But I will say we do a lot of testing with internals, external pilots, betas. So when something slips through, it's going to be something relatively small, because if you already had 50 people do it from different angles, the problem is employees actually the worst at testing, because they don't read the instructions. Their head just goes on autopilot. So I almost stopped including them in those like lab tests, because they rarely, we had one test where I intentionally introduced a number of errors and they didn't find errors. And to me, that was just the evidence they're not reading the instructions. Which means if we actually have other problems that I didn't introduce intentionally, I'm going to find them
anyway.
I need someone who has no idea what they're doing. Hence the babushka situation from before, because they're just following completely. They have no idea what they're doing, but it says go here, click this, click that, and so on.
Yeah, and it's true though, because like sort of like if you have a level of knowledge about whatever the product is, then you kind of you have a tendency to kind of fill in the gaps anyway. Like if there's something, like you may not intentionally do it, but they'll be like, well, I need to do this, and so if someone doesn't know the product, then they'll be like they'll have to have the guidance to be able to get them to the right spot, and therefore would get lost if there wasn't a exact information about where to click, right, or where, like, what checkbox to select. Whereas if you have knowledge about whatever it might be, then you might kind of fill in that blank, like, oh, it's kind of like it's like when you read a sentence that is missing a word, if it's like an of or a the or something like that, if your head, basically your brain just kind of fills in the blank anyway, like you can, and so you unintentionally you'll do that. So if you like I always, like, if I ever write something, I get someone else who doesn't have that knowledge of whatever the product is to do the babushka test, right? is to get like someone else to look at it to see if they can make it through, because that will then give you that instruction. Like they'll give you that level of, is it actually accurate that's in there? So
there was an interesting comment in the chat here about how the learners always find a way to break everything. And honestly, this is probably, there are many things I like about using Skillable, but one of the things I really, really liked is the sequencing. So chopping it up, right? So that, okay, maybe you did something stupid in lab 1, but you got through the end. When you go to lab number 2, it's going to start from a known good state. That cut down so many like troubleshooting times where I had to sit and figure out, okay, what did you do? I've delivered some of the VMware automation courses where if someone made a certain mistake, it was unrecoverable. No way. You are like on day 3, now you just have to destroy the entire lab and start from scratch. Or if you're lucky, someone could like clone someone else's lab, but oftentimes not. And it was just a nightmare. And people would be like, "This is so fragile." I'm like, "Yes, yes, it is."
But and it's like it is a balancing act, though, right? Because like there is certainly usefulness in doing that troubleshooting and going through some of those steps, like learning through doing something wrong and correcting it. But the problem is, or the challenge I always found was in the classroom, because you've only got that finite time, that the spending the time with one student who has managed to to ruin their environment to such a level that you've got to take time to work out what it was they did, and then once you've worked out what it was they did, then how to recover from it. You're then losing time with the rest of the class. You're losing time that, like in most courses, they're a little bit regimented with by the time you get to end of day 2, you have to be at this point, because if you're not, then you're going to be behind, etc. So yeah, so like it was like when I first started to working on creating labs and that thing on Skillable, like the idea of doing that modularization, there are some courses where you can't do that. Like there are some things that you cannot do on that, but the other ones, like wherever you can, being able to do that chunking, like to me it means that yeah, like if the learner does, if they do break the lab, that you're very easy just to wipe it out and start again, right? Because that where you're starting from is not day 1, it's it's the beginning of that lab. But it also means, like, sort of the other benefit that I find with having that sort of that modular sort of thing is that it then means that people can actually go back and just practice just that part of it as well. So say, for instance, if there's something that you're doing on day 3 that they want to reinforce that because they weren't sure about it, or they want, they're wanting to apply that into their own work, and that's thing means they don't have to do all the building to get to that point just to reinforce that little bit. So like that's, yeah, like it's when I always recommend it now, like if wherever you can put it in place, and like wherever it can be done, that's what the design should look like. So
absolutely, no, totally agree. And it's just, it works in multiple ways, right? Exactly like you said, but also it could be someone prepping for the exam, right?
Yep.
You maybe you go and do a practice exam and you realize, I have a little weak area here. I'm doing well on everything, but this one area could cause me to maybe fail. And so I want to go and dive into that topic again. But like you said, now I got to do 4 days of labs to do the lab on day 5, and it's just horrendous, right? Nobody wants to do that. You have to be so motivated. So being able to just say, well, launch lab number 15 or whatever it is, and then do that, it just makes so much more sense from a logistical point of view, both during the class but also after. But of course, it's I don't think there's any Germans here. Otherwise, I would have said it's it's not a ponyhof. That's what they always say. But there are some disadvantages when you do it, because there's a launch time, right? So you have to actively manage that. It's not like click, boom, done. It's online immediately. It does take like 5 or 6 minutes to actually boot the machines and to get services to run, and that's okay. But it also means, as the developer, we have to invest time in thinking about which exact order should we launch these, so that there's least amount of time wasted just waiting for things. Are there services we can remove so that we don't have to again sit and wait for them to come up? And one of the more recent things was also just saying, well, maybe some of these labs don't need all of these infrastructures. It's a tricky thing, because sometimes the students will be like, well, I should be able to go and, if I launch this lab, I should be able to go and do everything else. And I kind of agree with that. But we're starting to see, well, maybe if you shouldn't be working with this whole silo over here, the monitoring software, because you're going to do that in 6 modules from now.
Yeah.
So maybe we could just take it out, and it only is actually there when you get to the lab where you start using it.
Yep. Yep.
And that would decrease the loading time, also the cost, but mainly just less services we have to wait for.
Yep.
So it's all about trying to build that student experience so that things come up as fast as we can. But as the instructor, what I try to do, and then that's what I'm doing on the official slides now, was to just add a little rocket icon at the bottom of the slide to say, hey, when we get here, just give them a little reminder to go and launch it.
Launch that, yeah.
And then combine that with the feature that I don't want to say recently, but I didn't notice it from the beginning. There's a feature so you can disable all of the labs. From the beginning, by default, all of them are enabled. I actively love this feature. I'll go and disable all of them. And when it's time to do the first lab, I'll go and enable lab number 1. Yep. Because what usually happens is you have people doing the labs and they're not paying attention to what's being taught. Then these people typically become very disruptive later on, because then they'll like half hear something and now they'll have questions, and everyone else is like, well, dude, the guy just spent 20 minutes explaining it and now you want him to explain it again. Yeah. That solves that problem. But also, secondly, you don't have people launching the lab too early. That's something I have a lot. So they were like 10 minutes into a 1-hour lecture, they would launch the lab. Yeah. And then they would start working on it when the lecture is done. And then 20 minutes later, the maximum run time's out. And they're like, well, this sucks. And how come it can't be extended? And I'm like, well, you just spent 1.5 hours on a 45-minute lab. So maybe if you started it when I told you to start it instead, that would be easier. But by using that feature, we can just eliminate that conversation because they can't start it until it makes sense to start it.
So the just to as a bit of an advertisement for the last one of these calls, so the one for May, I actually did quite a few of the benefits, or the not benefits, but the functions that are available as trainers that are available in the TMS. So that was one of them. So if you if you're hearing Rasmus talk about that feature and go, I didn't know that it existed, I really recommend you go and have a look at that last month's call, because I went through a number of sort of like things, like what I call the hidden gems, the things that have been released that you may not know about, or that you may have seen or forgotten about, like since things got released. So I'm conscious of the time that we're coming up towards the end of the time. And I would love to just keep on chatting, Rasmus, because it is always a good fun time, and I really do appreciate your time and just getting some of those gems of information. So I appreciate your time in joining, and do a little bit of a wrap up. There is a comment from Gallardo about the learners, like, making mistakes is always a very beneficial way for them to be able to learn, because then but the labs are there to sort of teach you the right way to do things. But yeah, like, if they do something wrong, then that's where the knowledge that you've given them throughout the things going up to whatever the lab is, or your skill as the trainer comes in to try and guide them through. Hopefully they haven't messed it up so they have to wipe it completely, but certainly, like, some of that learning is reinforcement, right? Because in the real world, there's going to be times where things just go wrong and you have to fix it. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Carl, I'll just quickly take the opportunity to say that we're always happy to have more Veeam instructors out there. So if some of you are interested in entering that space, you feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can just send an email to rasmus@veeam.com, and happy to have a conversation. Can explain what we have to offer as well. And you already know the lab platform that we use, so that's an easy entry point right there.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, hopefully the well, like certainly, you know, we'll be distributing this out to the trainer community. So hopefully we drum up some more trainers for you. So, but yeah, so thank you
for having me, Carl.
No worries. Thank you for joining. Really appreciate it. All right, so a little bit of the final sort of bit of housekeeping, just that we do have those instructor offers you know we've had for quite a while. So obviously, you know, able to go and prep for classes and expand you know your own knowledge and that sort of thing. So you can go on and leverage the hands-on environment. So that's either using the mock lab access. We also have NCT All Access Pass, which is for the challenge labs. And we have that same offer for any of the AWS instructors as well, that you can apply for the AWS All Access Pass. The build around that. So you do need to go and actually apply for that. So if you go to skillable.com/offers, that'll then get you to our the instructor offers. So make sure you do sign up for those if you haven't already. Most of our Microsoft certified trainers would probably know already about the mock lab access, but certainly, you know, the NCT All Access Pass for the challenge labs, you may not necessarily be as aware of. Just some other resources, and that's a thing to make sure you're aware of, is the instructor recognition, the instructor dashboard, and we've also got a special page set up for Microsoft content as well. So skillable.com/mock. And if you do have any feedback for us, any ideas and that thing, please feel free to share that. You can go through feedback.skillable.com to fill in some feedback form there. Apart from that, we are at the top of the hour, so I do appreciate the fact that you've been spending your time with us, and I yeah, thank you for being here. And if you do have any feedback, questions, or anything like that, feel free to reach out. My email address was at the top of the presentation, or you can reach me on Twitter as well at Windows PC Guy. You can reach out there for any feedback or suggested topics that we might want to discuss in future episodes as well. But apart from that, thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much for your for comments and that sort of thing that have been coming through. It's always fun to get a little bit of feedback. And see you next month.